So it was kind of the perfect timing for all of this, but I think I've mentioned this in sermons before, but one of the things that I don't get often the opportunity to do, but I'm really grateful when I do, is my wife knows that I love to watch movies, and especially get to do that by going to the movie theater. It's one of my things that I just really enjoy. Back when I was in college and I was single and I was not living on campus, and I was working my way through college before I'd go to work, because I worked often second shift. I worked like 3 to 11. And so before that, oftentimes I'd go with a really good friend of mine. His name's D-Rock. Him and I would go see matinee movies together. So that was the cheapest prices. So we'd go together, watch a movie, and then both go to our separate jobs. And that was kind of our thing to do. So I don't get the opportunity to do it much, but every now and then, my wife will come to me like, just we get the kids in bed and it's late, and she's like, you know what, I got a show I like to watch. Go ahead, go see something. And so last week I got to go see this movie you probably heard of. It's called The Odyssey. Christopher Nolan has this new movie called The Odyssey, and it was good. I recommend that you go see it. There's nothing that's shady in it or things like that. It's this epic, obviously, that Homer wrote, but it's Nolan's take on the Odyssey. It was good. It's not going to be my favorite movie of all time. It didn't change my life drastically, but I enjoyed my time being there. And I will say this for it: it's very long, but it didn't feel long. So at least there's that. So if you get the chance. There were some interesting things that got me thinking about our sermon this week, though, as I was sitting in the movie theater, because in the movie, I won't spoil anything for you, they bring out this concept, though, that's pervasive all the way through, and they call it Zeus's Law. So the big kind of catch of the movie, is that there's been a problem with Zeus's Law, that the world is basically disrespecting this idea of Zeus's Law. And when you hear what Zeus's Law is, you'll think, wow, that sounds very familiar to something that I know. But basically, the idea of the law is hospitality. They say it in the movie as, treat others how you'd want to be treated, which Zeus never had a law that said treat others as they want to be treated. This is Christopher Nolan obviously taking creative license with the movie, which he's more than welcome to do. But you hear that phrase and you're like, oh yeah, I know that. That doesn't pertain to Zeus, but they had in ancient Greek culture, they had something similar, which was given, attributed to Zeus, which was this law of hospitality, which basically means if a stranger comes to your home, you're supposed to welcome them in because you don't know who they are. They could be a god in disguise, right? And same thing when you're a guest in somebody's home, you act and behave well because you are, a guest in their home. And what if someone comes to your home one day? You would want them to act well as well. So that's kind of the concept he's pulling from, which isn't at all the fullness of treat others how you would like to be treated, but that was what Nolan was working off of. But the problem is that you see in this culture that the reason that they obey this law, at least in the movie, is that because you see over the course of this time that because they broke Zeus's law or didn't live by Zeus's law, that there was punishment, that there was hardship, that there was trials that were just cast down on these people over and over and over again. And you start to see this idea of, this law has more to do with just avoiding punishment than it really does in addressing the actual heart of the person or actually speaking to what's going on in their life. And that got me thinking, because immediately I thought, this is so good. Months ago, I planned out we were going to be here this Sunday. We were going to be talking about the moral law. Last week we started our series and we just had this overarching introduction to what is the law. And now we can get into specifics, and we're going to talk about this morning this idea of the moral law of God. Last week I broke it up to you. I said the law is often broken up into 3 sections that God has given. It's the moral law, and then you have civil law and ceremonial law. And as we talk about the law, the moral law of God, we just started just briefly last week, and we talked about the summary that Jesus gives, which is love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. These are the 2 greatest commandments that Jesus speaks to. And so when we talk about the moral law, those things encompass all of those things. And what struck me sitting in this movie is just seeing the stark difference between this was the biggest disconnect for me watching this movie, which made it hard to really engage with it, is that there was no real urgency. He tried to weave this idea of Zeus's law throughout this entire movie and what a big deal it was to break it and what it meant that the world had gone away from obeying Zeus's law, but I never really bought it. I never really bought the fullness because people never really acted like the gods mattered to them that much until they did, until they were caught in a bad storm and until they were caught in a tough position. But then it hit me and I realized, wow, there's still a level to us, sometimes even as Christians, where today God doesn't play into our moral compass, our morality, the things that we do and how we behave enough until we find ourselves in a place where things are difficult or things are hard or we've been faced with hardships. And then it can become this thing that's all of a sudden, oh God, if you'll save me, if you'll deliver me, if you'll pull me out of this, I promise I'll be a good person. I'll do all the things you ask me to do. I'll go to church. I'll read the Bible. I'll do all of these things. It has no bearing on them. They're not considering God and who He is until it hits this place where all of a sudden, oh my goodness, I need help or I need rescue or things are hard or things are difficult. And so now, God, now I'll live how you want me to live. Now I'll do the things that you've asked me to do. And the problem with whether it's Zeus's law from this movie or any sort of approaching God that way is it doesn't speak to the fullness of what God intended for His law to be for us. And that's what I want us to understand and unpack more as we look at Exodus 19 and 20 together this morning. So if there is a key idea, a big idea for us to take away from this morning, I want it to be this, is that the moral law, God's moral law, is designed for unity with God and one another. God's moral law is designed for unity with God and with one another. His law is so much more than just a set of rules to follow, and then I won't get punished. It's so much more than just do these things and you'll have some sort of happy or blessed life. Do these things and I won't be mad at you or I won't punish you. That's what I think in Christopher Nolan's mind or in the mind of many secular people, I think that's what they think of when they think of church or when they think of Christianity or when they think of God and who He is. They equate Him with every other deity or God that they know or understand, which is this idea of just do these things to not get punished or to do these things to have a good life. And God is speaking to say, no, I give you this law so that you can come into relationship with me. From the time of the garden when Adam and Eve sinned and that relationship with God was broken, God is seeking to rebuild and saying, come in, I desire to have relationship with my people, relationship with my creation. And so He's seeking to draw us back into that. And you'll see throughout the course of this morning, I hope you'll see the beauty of the moral law that He designed and how it seeks to bring us into relationship with God and with one another as well. So as I talk about the moral law this morning, I hope you understand, and maybe you do as you've looked at Exodus 19 and 20 this morning, there's a much more commonplace name for that, which is the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments. And now obviously God's law encompasses more than, as we talk about in the coming weeks, we'll talk about ceremonial law, we'll talk about civil law, we'll talk about some other aspects that encompass these things. But if you're going to boil it down to what we have time for this morning as we address the moral law, what we're talking about is God's 10 Commandments. And I think most of us are familiar with those things and those 10 Commandments. But I want to, before it got me thinking this week, just going to that movie and thinking about the 10 Commandments, I just wanted to first address again why the 10 Commandments are different. Because when you start exploring into the story of the 10 Commandments and how Moses receives them, you may not know this, but there is pushback from people outside of Christianity who would look at the 10 Commandments and be like, well, those are just the same as these other set of commandments over here, because there are other codes or codes of law in the early age, 19,000 BC, some of these times around the time that Moses and Israel and these things are becoming a nation. One of the famous ones, the Code of Hammurabi, is one of the first, kind of codes of law that was given by the, then king of Babylon at the time. And people will look at that and find similarities and say, well, this is just Moses copying from this law over here. And so he's just, the 10 Commandments aren't anything special. They don't have any weight behind them. They don't have any moral significance because they're just the same as every other code of law. They look exactly the same. The thing you find is that when you look into those arguments and you start actually investigating, hey, wait, did Moses copy from this law? Is that true? They're right, it's older than Moses' law. Does that mean that he copied from them? And then you realize, no, the similarities are actually much less than what's different about these things. That you may find similarities in terms of in little things, in little phrasings, in the way that they deal with murder or the way that they deal with someone who steals property or the way that livestock is handled. And yet you realize that these are people who at the time were, they were living in the same set of circumstances. They were living with the same set of problems, and there was murder and there was stealing, and they had to know how to approach these things and how to handle them and deal with them. And so as you see the look at these things and you say, well, is there something going on here? Is there a difference to these things? Is there something that's wrong with, the differences in what you may see here versus there? You all of a sudden realize that no, actually, the differences are far greater. And the reason that these things are given in the same way that Zeus's law was actually given instead in terms of somebody seeking to be hospitable, that these codes and laws that are written like the Code of Hammurabi, these are more meant to be designed as civil laws, things to govern how we operate with one another. They're not designed to point us or look to the God of the universe, that seek to help us to see God and who he is in his fullness. They're not designed in the same way, or they're designed around this idea, these gods that people had at the time that were saying, hey, we're just trying to avoid punishment, or we're just trying to avoid somebody, some deity, some God out there getting upset with us. That instead, God's law, God's moral code, God's 10 commandments that he gave to his people were so much different. They were focused on that, like I said, bringing into relationship. They were also focused on dealing with the sin of a person, dealing with the sin of a person's heart and saying, what is characterizing your life, and why do you go after this sin, and why do you seek to follow after these things? It dealt with sin. It also dealt with this idea that God was seeking, and all the way back. You'll find this verse in the Old Testament and New Testament, but it comes from Leviticus 11:45. He tells his people, be holy as I am holy. The desire was for a relationship with his people, and his desire for them was to choose holiness, was to choose what is right and good and holy, because that is how he designed them, and that is what he created them for. Created them for relationship and created them for the holiness that he offers. And so that's kind of the backstory here. These moral commands, this word from the Lord, these 10 commandments are not just something that Moses saw, from a Babylonian king that he then copied down. These were something that he received from the Lord. As Exodus 19 tells us, in verse 1, it says, in the 3rd month after the Israelites left Egypt, on the very day they came to the desert of Sinai, after they set out from Rephidim, they entered the desert of Sinai, and Israel camped there in the desert in front of the mountain. Then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain and said, this is what you are to say to the house of Jacob, and what you are to tell to the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all the nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words you are to speak to the Israelites. I love that verse, that Exodus 19:5 and 6. If you obey, that just speaks to what we have been saying this morning, that when we talk about God's law, his moral law, his desire was for his people to be his treasured possession. Even though the whole of the earth was his, it says, you will be for me a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. That's what you're to tell the people, that God desires that you be his people. and why I'm laying these things out and why I'm giving these things for you, so that if you keep them, so that if you follow them, this is what you will be to me, my treasured possession, this holy nation. That's what God is calling them to. And so in that, the people see, and Moses tells them this is what's happening, and they agree. They say, yes, tell the Lord, we will follow him, we will obey, we will do what he asks us to do. And so then God tells them, okay, I'm about to descend upon this mountain. I'm about to come down in fire upon the mountain, and there's going to be smoke, and the mountain is going to tremble, and God shows up with his presence. And he warns the people, unless I tell you, just Moses is supposed to come up this mountain. He alone is supposed to be here. And so don't approach the mountain, don't touch the mountain lest you die, because the presence of the Lord, his holiness, his greatness, his majesty will be there on that mountain. And the people actually later on in Exodus, they become so fearful of what they see when they see, because it says in the book of Exodus that the fire comes down on the mountain and smoke engulfs the mountain, and that they feel the trembling of the earth. And they become so fearful that they don't want to approach. They tell Moses, go for us. Go to God for us. Go speak to him on our behalf, because if we speak to God, we're afraid that we will die. And so they send Moses as this ambassador for them, and he goes up onto the mountain, and God tells him to bring Aaron with him as well. So Moses and Aaron go up on the mountain, and they receive the 10 commandments from the Lord. And if we actually go a little bit ahead, we realize later on that actually Moses receives those 10 commands, and then when he comes down off the mountain the first time, the people of Israel had actually convinced Aaron to make an idol, to make a golden calf, and Moses actually ends up smashing the first set of commands that he receives from the Lord and has to go back and get a second set. But he goes and gets these commands, and these are the 10 commandments. Maybe you're familiar with them this morning, but here they are, the 10 commandments that the Lord gives to his people. He says, you shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Honor your father and mother. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony. And you shall not covet. These are the 10 commandments that God lays out for his people. And it's interesting, what's distinctly unique as you look at these commandments, and as I want to talk us through these things this morning, because I think no matter how familiar you are with the 10 commandments, it's good to be reminded of the moral law that God set out for his people and what he has designed for us and how he has designed for us to live. And so I want to look at them together today, but I want to break them up into two sections this morning, because you see there's kind of a pattern to what we've been talking about when we look back to the big idea. The moral law is designed for unity with God and one another. What you see from those 10 commandments is that we have a set that design us for how we are supposed to live in unity with God, and then how we are supposed to live in unity and with peace with one another as well. And so I want to look at these first four first. It's like a tongue twister there. I want to first look at unity with God. So here's the first four together that speak to that. First, we see the very first commandment. And many scholars and theologians, when they look at the 10 commandments, they actually think and have it said that these are in descending order of importance. Not that coveting is not important, but that in order of importance on this list, that where we start from the beginning is the most important, making its way down. And it'll make sense as we read this together. In Exodus verse 20, and God spoke all these words, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. The most important of all the commands. You shall have no other gods before me. There shall be no one in your life who should be in the place of God. There is nothing, no possession, no person, no thing in your life that should stand in the place of God for you. There is no other God before our God. There is no one that takes his place. There is no one that should be at the center of your life. And as a Christian, God should be the center of your life. He should be the center of your relationships, the center of your job, the center of your marriage. He should be at the center of all these things, and you should not put anything else there, even good things, even things like a spouse, even things like children, things like a house or possessions or a job. God gives really good things. I am so thankful for my wife. I am so thankful for my kids. Those things, though, my wife and kids should never go to the center of my life. They should never be my God for me. Because all that's going to end up do is actually hurting them more. I think oftentimes as human beings, we think the more you put something at the center of your life, that thing then, it knows its importance, it knows its place, it knows where it should be. And so because of that means it'll be better. It'll work out better if I make this thing the priority, if I put this thing at the place that it should be. And yet, the Bible shows us that the best thing we can do for our marriage, the best things we can do for our kids, the best thing we can do for our relationships, for our job, is to put God first and to make Him the primary place in our life. That's the best thing we can do for our families, for our friends, for the people in our life, for our church. As the pastor of this church, I need to battle with the idea that this church is not the first importance. This is not the idol. If God takes this church away, if He allows it to, it becomes no more and it goes, God is still good and He is still the center. I don't lose my identity. I don't lose who I am. I don't lose all of these things because God is at the center of my life, not the church, and not my wife, and not my kids, and not any of these other good things that God gives. No other gods before me. And in conjunction with that, you shall not make for yourself an idol. Kind of just one step down from this is not only shall you have no other gods before me, you don't make an idol. So maybe at the time, the people at the time, there is no problem that's new under the sun, right? For the people of Israel at the time, there was this idea that maybe they could have both. That we can serve God, but then we can have an idol to Baal in our house, or we can serve and love God, but we can also make this golden calf and we can pray to Him. And guess what? Christian, to this day, in this day and age, we still struggle with the same thing. We still think, can I have God and can He be my God? But can I have this over here as well? Can I also have this idol? Can I also have this thing that is important to me and that gets a lot of my time and that I put in the place of God? And He's saying, no, you shall not make for yourself an idol. And then I love reading down from there because we come to this very powerful verse in this passage. In verse 5, you shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for sin of the fathers to the third and the fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. I love when we get to verses like this and you're reminded of God's character and who He is when He says something, and maybe it like pricks your heart a little bit, maybe it makes you pause and you're like, what does that mean? That God is a jealous God. Because all we ever associate jealousy with is wrong, it's sin, it's not good. And so how do we wrestle with the fact that God says He is a jealous God? It's because there is a type of jealousy that is holy. There is a good and holy type of jealousy. Think about, for my relationship, for myself, with my wife. If I were to find out that there was a time and a place where there was infidelity, there was cheating, there was, someone else had taken something that belonged to me when it comes to my relationship with my wife, it's good that I feel jealousy. It's good that I feel like that's wrong. That's not right. We are one flesh. That's mine. In the same way, she should feel that way about me if that were to happen, if I were to be unfaithful. Those are good types of jealousy. Those are good types of jealousy to have because God tells us, He instituted it from the dawn of creation. Man and woman, when they become married, shall become one flesh. And so what someone does to my wife is what has been done to me. And so that is a healthy type of jealousy. Of course, it can spiral into unhealthiness. Of course, there are unhealthy types of jealousy where one partner can't go somewhere without the other person asking, where you been? Who are you talking to? What are you doing? Why aren't you with me? Of course, that can always spiral into unhealthy. But just in the same way that Jesus can be angry without sin, there is holy types of anger. There are holy types of jealousy. And that is God for his people. We are his bride. The church is his bride. And so if his bride goes and is unfaithful with another idol, with another God, he has every right to be jealous for his bride. I think it'd be more concerning. It would say more about my marriage or your marriage or God's approach towards us if we find out they've been unfaithful and say, oh, well, whatever. Just move on. Just move on to the next. What does that say? That it doesn't invoke in you what? That doesn't invoke in you jealousy and anger? That speaks to this is a relationship that matters, that I care about. God cares about us, and so he cares about what we do, and he cares about who we give ourselves to. And when we give ourselves to the idols of the world, he says, no, you're mine. You don't belong to the world. You belong to me. And so that type of jealousy is good and holy and right. And so we should not make for ourselves any other idol. And for us, maybe we're not at home carving things out of wood and stone and gold, but we make idols of things in our lives all the time. We make idols of homes, we make idols of possessions, we make idols of people. And we shall not do that, because our God is the only one who deserves our love and our affection and everything that we have. Number 3, you shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. I'm preaching out of the NIV this week, but actually to understand this better, I like the translation when it says, I should have changed it, I just forgot, but you shall not take the Lord's name in vain. I like that translation better. Why? Because vanity is this empty thing, right? We should not seek after vanity because it is empty and it is worthless. It's not full of anything. And when we use the name of God the way that it is not supposed to be used, when we use it in vain, it means we're emptying it. When I just throw the name of God out willy-nilly, or Jesus, that's emptying it of what God's name means. Think about when God speaks, when it talks about his name, when he speaks to Moses in the burning bush, I am who I am. Think about the weight of that. Think about the weight of what a name means and what God's name means. And when we just throw it around willy-nilly, and this is a funny story, but God uses even the smallest things in our lives to convict us. But I was thinking about, I'm constantly, this is something I have to, I'm starting to work with it, with my kids on it. My kids are in, public school in, Lombard, and they hear things from their friends that, they wouldn't hear at home, but kids are like this. They come home and they think what their friends say is, they don't think that it's wrong. They repeat it, right? So we've had instances where, one of our kids will be like, oh my God, and I'm like, whoa. Hey, we don't say that, because that's God's name. That's important. That has weight. And when we just throw it around like it doesn't matter, like it's any other interjection, then we're saying that is vanity. That name's vanity. And I got convicted of that even more because something my parents did that I thought was silly when I was a kid, and then I become a parent, and I'm so proud of them for doing these things. But we were watching a movie together, me and the kids. We were watching Rookie of the Year. Have you ever seen it? It's a silly baseball movie about a kid named Henry Rowan Gardner who he falls on his elbow, and then all of a sudden he defies the laws of science, and he can throw a fastball 100 miles an hour because his arm is like a rubber band. He's firing these fastballs. Anyway, it's a cute little movie. It's about, he was bad at baseball, and then he starts pitching for the Cubs because he throws a ball from center field in Wrigley Field all the way to the catcher. And so he gets scouted by the owner, and he brings him on the team, and it's cute. It's a fun little movie. But I forgot about at the end, my parents did this thing when I was a kid, because all our movies were on VHS, right? And so on VHS, you could tape over things, right? You could take your VHS player and tape over parts of the movie. Well, my parents had taped over this part at the end of the movie where his mom is watching Henry pitch in the crowd, and I can't remember exactly. I think either he lost the ability to throw hard, or it's at a really intense point of the game, and they taped over this part where it's supposed to be humorous, but it's cutting back and forth between the manager and Henry on the mound and his mom in the stands, and they're all repeating over and over again. They're repeating, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, like in a nervous type of, they're nervous for each other. And I forgot about that. And it's played to be humorous in the movie, and I thought it was silly as a kid. I'm like, we know, Mom, we know people say that, like we know, but they did this in all of our movies. Any movie that they thought was appropriate to watch, but had moments like that, they would tape over it. And it would be like, the thing would be playing, and then all of a sudden it would be a gray, remember that gray and black fuzzy screen that would pop up on the TV sometimes? It would just go pshh, and then all of a sudden they'd be back. And it was just normal for us. But my kids were watching that, and I realized, I need to fast forward. Like, they don't need to hear this. They don't need to see me even giving an implication that I'm allowing, that I think this is funny or that I think it's okay in this moment, because God's name, the name of God, carries weight. What he has done for us, what he has given to us, what he sacrificed for us, that carries weight. And so I don't want my kids, I don't want myself to become comfortable just throwing around his name as if it doesn't matter or as if it's not important. It's not just, when I use it to swear or when I use it to any of these things. That we know those things are bad, but even growing comfortable saying the name of God flippantly, saying it in vain, which is emptying of its power. I love this quote. John Piper says this about the name of the Lord. He says, "Don't empty God of his weight and glory. Fill it up rather than emptying it." That's what I want to be known for, is that we fill the name of God with weight, that we don't empty it. And then we have number 4, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. For God, this was important. This was the day from the moment that he had creation. He rested. Not that God needed to rest, but that he did rest. He rested on that day, and that was important. It was important for him that his people know and took time to rest, not just because he created us, that we need rest, but also because it's not just the idea of, just, sit on your butt and just relax and just enjoy the day, but it's also, he says, remember the Sabbath day. Remember why this day is important. Remember why we rest. Because God rested first, because he instituted this day, because he uses this day to think about him, to remember him, to keep this day holy, is that we remember it for God. And this is the one of the commands that I had kind of trouble placing. I bolded it because I included it with the next one as well, which is in unity with one another, because God also used this law of the Sabbath in a way with the workers and their bosses and with masters and slaves to say, hey, there's going to be a day that you give your workers to rest, where you give people a break from their work. So he used it not only in a way to draw us to himself, but also in unity with one another. And then there's a few more here as we go through the 10 commandments together. These are, as I said, God speaking about how we have unity with one another. It says, honor your father and mother, verse 12, so that you may live long in the land and that the Lord is giving you. 13, you shall not murder. 14, you shall not commit adultery. 15, you shall not steal. 16, you shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. And 17, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his manservant, or maidservant, or his ox, or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. We have kind of this rapid fire of these things, but that doesn't make them less important. These are things that God lays out to say, this is how we operate in community, in unity, in healthiness with one another. One, you need to honor your father and mother. Honor them. They are, we'll learn later, this is the command, the first command with a promise, that you may live long in the land. God thought highly of that relationship between son and daughter and mother and father, is that you honor your mom and dad. You may not always agree with them. You may not always see eye to eye. You may not always understand everything that they're doing, but you honor them. You honor them as they seek to honor the Lord by living as holy moms and dads, as holy mothers and fathers before you. You shall not murder. Obviously, God's creation, every life, it has value. Every life is valuable. And so to take that, to rob somebody of their life, is a big deal to God. You shall not murder, shall not take the life that God has ordained, that God has given. You shall not commit adultery. God has created man and woman to be one flesh, as we spoke about. And so we do not, when we become one flesh, We do not give that flesh then out willy-nilly, man to another woman, woman to another man. We do not commit adultery. We stay faithful to the wife and to the husband that God has given to us. Do not steal. God is the one who gives and takes away. We're not in charge of taking from somebody else what does not belong to us. We do not steal. I learned that. I can only remember stealing once in my life, and I will never forget it. My friend Nick down the road, I was like 7 maybe, had this cool boomerang. I'd never seen a boomerang before. You like throw it and it come back to you. Like, what is this? This is so cool. And I remember my parents went inside to say goodbye to his parents, and he went inside. He had to go inside, and I was out there alone, and I had I was playing with the boomerang, and as my parents said, okay, it's time to go, I just picked it up and like stuck it next to my leg like this and like walked. You know, as a 6-year-old thinks you're being sneaky, you're like, I got this. You know, I'm getting it away. And sat in the car and had it next to my leg, and my mom looked back and she was like, Sam, what do you have? Nothing. And I'll remember when she found out, oh boy, it wasn't even the punishment that came afterward. It was you have to go back to the house. We were going to sit in the car. You're going to get out. You're going to go up to the front door, knock. You're going to ask Nick and his parents to come to the door, and then you're going to say, I stole this. I think I made it through that part without crying, and then going back to the car, I just cried all the way back. And I was like, I never want to steal again. Because that's not how we're not designed. We shall not steal. We don't take what doesn't belong to us. You do not give false testimony. We speak what is true. We do not speak lies. We speak to and attest to what is true and what is good, even when, I think oftentimes false testimony, you think about saying something so that I can, something for me, something so that I gain an advantage, something that makes me look good, sometimes we speak false testimony because we don't want to be uncomfortable, because we don't want to speak about what might hurt somebody else. But we don't share false testimony, whether for our own gain or to make ourselves more comfortable or to try to appease somebody else. We speak what is true because God is a God of truth, and so we speak about what is true. And then we don't covet. We don't desire or long after things that are not ours, things that we don't have. This is even another level to where you say, well, I didn't steal that thing. No, but in your heart you did. Because you desired it, because you wanted it, because you're longing after it, you're thinking about it, you're meditating on it, you're allowing it to consume your mind that, what somebody else I want, what somebody else has, I want. And God says, we do not covet. And so these are the laws, these are the moral commands that God gives us for living in unity with Him and unity with one another. And I just want to close, as we close here this morning, I just want to draw our attention back even to what we talked about last week. That in all of these things, Jesus speaks about them in His ministry in the New Testament. We talked about this verse last week, but it bears repeating again. Matthew 23, when asked by one of the religious leaders, what is the greatest command? He said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment, and the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these 2 commandments depend all the law and the prophets. This is how He lays it out for His people. This is why we say these are things to love the Lord and to love others. You will not do these things if you are loving your neighbor. You will not do these things if you love God and seek Him first. This is how He lays it out, that this is the greatest commandments, to love the Lord and to love one another. And when we seek to do those things, and by the power of the Holy Spirit, He gives us the strength that we need to live those things out. As we close this morning, just looking at what can we do? What are some things we can take away from this week? If there's an action to take, I'd love for you to do this week. Help me as we study the moral law together. Do this for me. Go back this week and read the Sermon on the Mount, beginning of Matthew 5, starting in Matthew 5. And make note of every time Jesus speaks about the moral law, and not just how He speaks about it, how He affirms it, and how He calls us to a higher and holier standard. Read the Sermon on the Mount and read how Jesus speaks about these things. He'll speak about adultery, and He'll speak about how it's not just I go out and sleep with somebody else who's not my wife. It's what's going on in your heart. talks about murder, and he talks about it's not just the physical act of taking somebody else's life, but what's going on in your heart. What does your anger look like? Read that this week. Read the Sermon on the Mount this week in your devotions sometimes. And just make note of those things. Make note of those moments where Jesus speaks about the law and the 10 commandments. If there's a prayer to pray, Lord, my desire is for a holy life, but I can only do that in the power of the Holy Spirit. Please help me on a daily basis to choose what is good and say no to what is evil. Help me to hate my own sin. In Leviticus, he calls us, as I said, to be holy as he is holy. We do that now. We live in a holy life now. The only way we are able to do that is because the Holy Spirit gives us the strength to do those things. We need his help. If there's a praise to repeat, Jesus, I praise you because you are the only perfect law keeper, and you did that for me. Thank you that I can be holy because you have given me your holiness. Thank you for taking my sin in exchange. I can't help but I hope we don't ever think about the moral law without thinking about that we could never live up to the standard that God had for us. But Jesus did it for us. And we have this great exchange where he then gives us his holiness and he takes our sin, the world's most unfair trade of all time, our sin for his holiness. And what a beautiful reminder that is when we look at the moral law, is that I fall short of this all the time, but praise God for Jesus Christ, who died for my sin and who gave me his holiness in place of that sin. Thank you, Lord. Because without that hope, I wouldn't have hope. Wouldn't have the hope of heaven, and I wouldn't have the hope of Jesus Christ and a life with him in eternity.